Hey, this is Joker News. You know what it is. Let's jump right into it. So, we're going to be talking about how the deaths of Biggie and Tupac changed rap media forever. Yes, 25 years ago, Wednesday, Biggie Smalls was killed in Los Angeles, marking the end of the most violent chapter in hip hop's history. For the writers and editors who covered his and Tupac's lives and music, the tragedies stick with them to this day. Culture advocacy typically demands that advocates live the work it's all in all the time. By the 1990s, when hip hop was still viewed by the outside world as both a fad and a menace, a generation of writers who grew up immersed in its culture took up the task of covering it from a place of love. This was advocacy journalism, and the care they poured into their work provided much needed context and helped shape how hip hop was covered as it began to attract more mainstream attention. And while many of the more established outlets still operated at too great a cultural distance to cover hip hop carefully or thoroughly, if you've seen Newsweek's Snoop Dogg cover in 1993, those doing it from the inside were accused of being too close to it, even inciting, saying, "Hell yes, we're close to it." Journalist and author Daniel Smith wrote in 1999's The Vibe History of Hip Hop, "We love this. They had to. They couldn't have done the job effectively otherwise." But the lift became exceptionally heavy when tragedy tore through the hip hop community as its two biggest stars were killed 6 months apart. Now, Tupac, who had become one of the most polarizing figures in popular culture, died on September 13th, 1996, 6 days after he was shot in Las Vegas. He was 25. On March 9th, 1997, the notorious B.I.G., Tupac's friend, turned foe and was shot and killed in Los Angeles 2 weeks before the release of his highly anticipated second album, Life After Death. He was 24. Their deaths occurred amid rapid change within hip hop. There was more money flowing through the business, resulting in more pressure to succeed. There was an intra community culture war waging over its direction, and Tupac and Biggie were the most high profile names at the center of highly publicized bi-coastal tension. And as the primary outlets covering hip hop and the culture around it, The Source, which featured Biggie on the cover of its latest issue at the time of his death, and Vibe, which published Tupac's infamous prison interview, and the controversial Last Verse West cover at the conflict's peak, covered both tragedies with the nuance and sensitivity they demanded. However, operating at close proximity to back tragedies took its toll on the journalists who were doing the work. Now, these moments have stayed with the people responsible for covering hip hop at the time, even scarring them in some instances. And they had a job to do, but this felt like, more work, more than work to them. It was like something bigger. And so Alan Light remains frustrated by the notion that Vibe exacerbated the East-West conflict. Light, a founding editor of Vibe, who became its second editor-in-chief in 1994, says that the tension was very real, particularly between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records, and become the biggest story in hip-hop by 1996. Now, obviously, you can't help but look back and see how things unfolded, but you work with the cards in front of you, and you make decisions. And that was what everybody was talking about. So that was our responsibility to cover it, he says. And these are words quoted from him. Now, the cover story for Vibe September 1996 issue was an interview in which Biggie and Diddy, during his Puff Daddy era, expressed their desire to de-escalate the conflict. A 2016 Complex piece by journalist, author, and former Vibe editor Rob Kenner chronicles how members of the editorial staff, including Kenner himself, feared the eventual cover line, East vs. West, Biggie and Puffy break their silence, and could potentially do the exact opposite. I made a point of stating that we must not use the phrase East versus West on the cover, adding that the situation was so tense that if anything happened to anyone in the death row or bad boy camps, we would have blood on our hands, Kenner wrote. And the cover became a near instant point of contention and is still criticized for accelerating the conflict. Now, at this point, nearly 2 years had passed since Tupac was shot at Quad recording studios in New York, sparking his feud with Biggie and Diddy because he believed they had information about the attack. Now, claims, which both men denied, it had been a year since former Death Row CEO Suge Knight antagonized Diddy on stage at the 1995 Source Awards. It was nearly a year after Knight's friend and bodyguard Jake Robles was shot and killed at a party in Atlanta. Now, an incident Knight blamed Bad Boy for. It was months after Snoop corrupt and Daz Dillinger stomped on the New York City skyline in the Dog Pound's New York video. A shoot that nearly turned tragic when a drive-by shooter fired at Snoop and his entourage. And that's pretty big news if you just think about that right there by itself. He's getting shot at just for making a video, and his entourage was even getting shot at. It was a mere months after Death Row and Bad Boys confrontation following the 1996 Soul Train Music Awards, as well as the release of Hit 'Em Up and Tupac's tirade in which he taunts and threatens Bad Boy. Now, Junior Mafia, Lil Kim, Mobb Deep, and Chino XL still Light is quick to point out that the cover didn't cause Tupac or Biggie's killings. If you don't like the decisions that we made and you want to come for our coverage, so be it. It's time. We put ourselves out there, he says. And my fear with that is that it turns into, it was all this coverage that caused the deaths. And when you look at the story, that's just not the story, is what he tried to say. Now, dealing with the fallout from editorial decisions is part of the job, but soon after, Light was forced to make, another difficult but necessary choice when he had to stop the processes and presses on Vibe's November 1996 issue after learning about Tupac's death. Literally, the one time in my life where I had to say, stop the presses, he recalls. From there, the staff spent 48 hours reworking the issue to address Tupac's killing, including wrapping a special cover around the original, which featured, a new edition in the middle of their comeback. Now, understandably, Light says the experience was unforgettable. That's the stuff that stays with you for the rest of your life, he said. And, this is just all like just a little piece of the pie. But we're going to continue on with these news and keep you updated. But I just thought I'd give you that insight. And these are, news and that are recent. But hey, hit that like and subscribe. Let me know what you think. And we're going to keep you updated.